Okay. Well, welcome to Meet the Candidate, Loren Culp, candidate for governor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So this is an opportunity where you don't have to be the candidate. You can just be the guy that you're introducing yourself. And tell me about where you grew up.
Well, I grew up kind of all over the state. My dad was a deputy sheriff in Jefferson County, which is outside of, up by Port Townsend. I lived in a small farming community called Chimacum, Washington. That's where I went to grade school and junior high. And then in my freshman year of high school, my dad got out of law enforcement and moved us to the northeastern corner of the state to Republic. And went to high school there, met my high school sweetheart, Barb. We've been married for 43 years this year. And then joined the military at 19.
Which branch?
The U.S. Army. I served from 1980 to 1984, active duty. And I was in the world famous 101st Airborne Division. Went through drill sergeant school at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And I was a combat engineer, achieved the rank of sergeant. I also did a tour overseas, 1 year in South Korea, and spent 4 years in the military.
Okay. Are there some things you observed about the world while you were stationed in South Korea that you've carried with you?
Yes, absolutely. This one thing in particular really stuck with me and has over the years. You know, it makes me very proud to be an American. While I was in Korea, Barb and our two young boys had to stay home. It was a hardship tour. I was stationed up close to the DMZ, and so families couldn't go there. But while I was over there, I participated in a joint military exercise. It's called Team Spirit, and it happened every year in South Korea, where all of the branches of the South Korean forces and the branches of United States military would do a joint military exercise all across the country of South Korea. And we would travel around from one spot to another in convoys with jeeps and trucks full of American soldiers. And when we would approach a small village, we were traveling around the countryside on dirt roads. And when we would get close to a village, the people that lived there, young children, older people, they'd all come running up to the edge of the road, and they'd line the edge of the road as we drove by. And they would have big smiles on their faces, and they'd be waving with one hand, and in the other hand, they would have little American flags. And they were just so happy to see us. I explain it in my rallies, in my speeches, that they didn't care what race we were. They didn't care our income or our education. They just cared that there were Americans that were in those vehicles, and they were just so happy to see us. We saved their country from communism during the Korean War and have protected their country ever since. And they were just so proud that we were Americans. Nothing else mattered to them. And I like to talk about that. We need to bring that back and remember that here at home, that it doesn't matter our race or our sex or our income, education. None of that matters. We're Americans. We need to remember that. And we all have hopefully one common goal, and that's to keep America as the greatest nation in the history of the world.
Wow. Well, after that Army career, where did you decide to land?
Well, after serving 4 years, Barbara and I decided to get it out so I could spend a little more time with the boys as they grew up and with her. And so we moved back to Washington State, where we both grew up, and moved to the Olympia area where I learned the trades. I learned how to build houses and do concrete foundations and driveways. And I worked for other people for a few years. And then in 1988, I started my own construction business, working right out of Olympia. Started that business from nothing. Had one employee and an old truck that I bought from my grandpa, um, and started my own business. I was realizing my American dream, working for myself. But I ran that business for over 20 years, built it up to where I had multiple crews and trucks doing jobs all around Puget Sound, both commercial and residential jobs, and ran that for over 20 years. And as I mentioned before, my dad was a deputy sheriff when I was growing up, and my childhood dream was to be a police officer. So after running my business for over 20 years, at the age of 49, a job opening came open for a police officer in the city of Republic, where I went to high school, where I met Barb, where she had lived all her life. And I applied for that job and got hired, sold my business to my youngest son, and went through the police academy with a class about half my age. But been a patrol officer, a narcotics detective for over 3 years, a canine handler, and I'm currently the chief of police in the Republic and have been for the last 4 years. So that's kind of my career path. Served in the military, ran my own business for over 20 years, and been in law enforcement for about the last 10 years.
That's a really interesting late career switch. I mean, I've had some serial
Yes.
careers as well. I understand how that draw can happen, and that's very interesting. So you realized that dream. What interested you in politics and elected office?
Well, I didn't grow up thinking, one day I can't wait to be a politician.
I'm not
I don't
sure
know
anybody
a lot of
does.
people that do that. Right. But it just, how sometimes you're just led down a path. Um, and back in 2018, there was an anti-gun initiative that made it against the law for 18 to 21 year olds, military age young adults. They could not buy a semi-automatic rifle. And when that passed, I got asked by citizens if I was going to start arresting 18 to 21 year olds who I saw with a semi-automatic rifle. And having a good knowledge of the Constitution and the role of public servants, um, I knew that it was unconstitutional to, I would be violating someone's constitutional rights if I arrested them for that, because we all know the Second Amendment, but the Washington State Constitution is even more explicit. In Article 1, Section 24, it says that the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired. And also, Article 1, Section 1 says that the power is inherent in the people and government is there to protect citizens' rights. So, as a government agent, um, Article 1, Section 1 tells all public servants that their job is to protect citizens' rights. So, there was no way I was going to violate citizens' constitutional rights. I took an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution. And my stance actually got me on the national news. I was on the One American News Network, on the Graham Ledger Show. I did hundreds of radio and TV um, interviews all across the country. And I was on Tucker Carlson show talking about my stance because apparently it's an anomaly for a public servant to uphold and defend the Constitution and uphold their oath of office. I didn't think that it was at the time, but apparently it made national news. So that led me to writing a book in December of 2018 called American Cop, explaining the role of government and the citizens' rights because we're not taught a lot, especially in Washington State. I don't remember ever being taught about the Washington State Constitution, which is the rule book for our government. So I wrote a book in December of 2018 called American Cop, and it went to number one on Amazon in several different categories, was there for weeks. And that led me to being invited around the state to Republican Party Lincoln Day dinners and to sportsman shows to talk about citizens, about our rights and responsibilities. And I was somewhere in this state speaking every weekend through the spring and into summer of 2019. And people started asking me to run for governor. And after I got asked to do that multiple times, then I took it seriously. And in July talked to Barb, about our 2 grown sons and our 7 grandkids that live in the state. And if I don't jump in with both feet and try to help to turn the state around, that I would regret for the rest of my life. When you have a lot of people asking you to run for governor, um, you just kind of have to sit back and think about it. And I did. And I didn't see anybody that was running or anybody on the horizon that I could trust to stand up for citizens' rights the way that I did back in 2018 when there wasn't an election, nobody thinking about running for governor.
Okay. Well, and that brings us to our last question, which is your opportunity to make that direct pitch, your 1 to 2 minute. Why should people vote for Loren Culp for governor?
Well, there's 2 clear choices now. I've emerged out of a field of 36 candidates as the Republican candidate to take on Jay Inslee. I am all about citizens' rights, about our government staying within the confines of the Constitution, following that rule book. That the Constitution tells our government what it can and can't do. It doesn't tell we the people what we can and can't do. And currently we have an office holder in that office who allows law and order to be disregarded. Just look at what's happening with the riots. It's out of control, and the current office holder is condoning it. He sent in our young men and women when it was requested by the State Patrol and local law enforcement because things were getting out of hand. He sent in our young men and women in uniform in the National Guard in there into a violent situation without the means to protect themselves or other people. I would never do that. But these riots cannot be allowed. Peaceably assembling, protesting, absolutely allowed. That's our First Amendment right. But when it turns violent, when people are looting buildings and lighting buildings and cars on fire, throwing rocks and frozen water bottles at our police, that's no longer a First Amendment right. And it is the duty of our government to provide law and order for these communities. There's people that live there, there's people that work there, people that own businesses, and they were absolutely being terrorized by people that were rioting. And when a riot happens and I'm governor, the National Guard will be sent in. They will have the means to protect themselves and other people, and they will help local law enforcement arrest the criminals and put them in jail where they belong. Not appease the criminals like some of the politicians have done and say that it was a summer of love. It's absolutely ridiculous. If you allow bad behavior, you're going to get more and more bad behavior. Mm-hmm. And on the way this virus was handled, the current office holder decided he was going to pick winners and losers, who could work and who couldn't. If you owned a pot store, abortion clinic, or a big box store, you could go to work. But if you had a church, a gun store, mom and pop cafe, or a salon, you had to close. The virus doesn't know which buildings it could go in and which it can't. So as governor, when the next virus comes around, I'll have press conferences with the medical professionals to explain to everyone what's going on, what we should do to protect ourselves. And then as governor, make sure the supply chain is as open as possible for the equipment that we need. And then I will let free individual citizens decide what's best for themselves, their family, and their business. Because a barber cutting one person's hair can be just as safe or safer than a big box store with 150 people in it. I believe in individual freedom and liberty, and I will help to return that to Washington State. And I appreciate the time to meet you all and talk to you.
Okay, well, thank you for making the time to come on our program, Loren, and good luck with your campaign.
You bet. And my website is culpforgovernor.com. Thank you.
90 million Christians are eligible to vote.
40 million didn't.
That's 45% of eligible Christians not voting.
We can change that.
We Believe We Vote was designed to arm people of faith with information on candidates
and how they line up with biblical and constitutional principles.
It's simply WeBelieveWeVote.com.
We're on a mission to rev up the 2020 election.
Tell your friends, your neighbors, and especially your pastors to rev up.
Be an educated voter.
Arm yourself with truth based on the Word of God.
2020, rev up.
Register, educate, vote.
Rev up.
Rev up.
Rev up 2020.